Hello, and welcome to another episode of Lore and Crime, a podcast where we dive into the shadowy depths of history, where true crime and chilling events inspire dark fictional tales that will keep you up at night. In this episode, we're traveling to Southeast Asia, to Manila, the capital of the then Spanish colony of the Philippines. In the oppressive heat of October 1820, the city became possessed, not by spirits or invading armies, but by grief, fear, and suspicion. This is the story of the Manila Massacre, and those who witnessed the city descend into madness. It had been 2 long weeks since I left Manila. I was in the highlands, staying with Mang, my bride's father, helping him tend to a small grove of cacao trees in the foothills above Laguna. It was a tradition, he said. A final task. The last time a man sees the world as a son before returning to it as a husband. Our days were consumed with hacking through the relentless tangle of overgrowth, scavenging for wild mushrooms, and setting fish traps by the spring, whose crystal clear waters gushed from the mountainside with wonderful freshness. At night, we slept under woven mats, sharing tobacco and stories. He told me about the day his own father-in-law gave him his daughter's hand in marriage, and how he'd promised never to let a man near her who couldn't carry his own weight in silence. This was his test for me. I passed, or so I believed. He spoke not with words, but with actions. With the way he handed me his blade on that final morning, as we speared fish in the stream, a gesture of trust, of acceptance. I was family now. I thought of how I would return to Manila and find the house filled with flowers. I imagined Lucia's playful voice teasing me about my sunburned skin. I'd catch her in my arms, lift her off the ground. There would be music, drums, echoing from the plaza. The air would be thick with the scent of lechon roasting on spits. Her veal, lovingly sewn by her aunt, would be waiting. I carried fresh guavas in a woven pouch. Her favorite. I was proud, whole. But as we approached the city gates, anticipation turned to dread. We were welcomed not by music, but by an oppressive, haunting silence. The streets were wrong. You could feel it before you saw it. No laughter, no shouting vendors. Even the dogs were quiet. I noticed the flags first, black rags tied to doorposts and chapel doors, swaying like dead birds. I saw a woman collapse near the market, clutching her belly and muttering prayers. A boy ran past with no shoes, no shirt, his face empty. Mang and I looked at each other. He grunted. Something's happened. We made our way down the narrow alleys towards our home in Binondo, just across the river from the walled city of Manila, my feet growing heavier with each step. There was a smell in the air, acrid, like burnt vinegar and old blood. I thought maybe the canals had overflowed again. The Pasig River often stank, but this was different. Near the old baker stall, I saw Rosa, my sister, standing alone, looking lost. Her hair was tangled, and she was barefoot. Her hands were pressed to her chest as if holding something fragile inside. The sight of her, so small and still against the vacant street, sent a shiver through me. She should have been with Lucia, preparing the wedding garlands and fussing over the lace. We should have caught her in a moment of laughter, but she was instead silent and unmoving, as if the world had stopped around her and left her behind. When she saw me, she began to cry. She didn't run to embrace me or leap into my arms with news and chatter. She just stood there, frozen like a statue carved from grief. She looked right through me and whispered, "She's gone." Her words were quiet, like a sigh that took everything with it. Time stopped. "Lucia?" I asked, but I didn't need her to answer. The way her eyes hollowed, the way her knees buckled as though they couldn't hold her weight, all told me what I feared. Rosa nodded, her chin trembling. She drank from the well a few days ago. The water made her sick. She fought for a day and a night, but then she went still. She looked down, not wanting to see my face. I dropped the guavas. They hit the ground and rolled away, like I imagined my heart would. My hands didn't work. They hung uselessly at my side. I opened my mouth, but my voice was gone, swallowed by the void that filled me. I turned and saw Mang, his face like stone. I wanted to run, to find a place where this wasn't real. I wanted to wake from this nightmare, but my legs were lead. Rosa reached out, her fingers trembling. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry." But her voice came from somewhere far away. I felt Mang's hand on my shoulder, heavy, steady, trying to pull me back. I stumbled away from him and towards the house. It was quiet, eerily clean. They had scrubbed it to try and drive the evil away. The bedding had been burnt, the floorboards re-oiled with vinegar and salt. But nothing could cleanse the space of her absence. There was a mat where she once slept, now empty. One of her shirts was neatly folded there besides a bowl of dried hibiscus. I picked it up. It still smelled like her. I didn't cry, not then. That night, the darkness arrived like a storm. I sat alone on the rooftop, staring down at the river while the city moaned beneath me. We are a city of narrow lungs and no escape. Even before the deaths began, Manila breathed smoke and rot. The canals behind the market were black and slow, thick with the refuse of butchers and fishmongers. The air smelled of vinegar, salted entrails, pig blood, and mango left too long in the sun. Rats darted across roof beams like shadows with claws. Stray dogs wandered, ribs showing through thin fur. With the constant heat, everything fermented. But now, things were worse than usual. The gutters frothed. Decaying water turned the color of rust. Bodies were being piled up on carts. The old men at the corner, the ones who never moved from the stools, began to cover their mouths with banana leaves. The children coughed in their sleep. Something was coming. People felt it before we named it. People were dying by the scores. They collapsed in the middle of meals, their stomachs twisting in on themselves like a snake swallowing its own tail. A boy went blind before he died. A woman miscarried in the plaza, her blood pooling in the street as if the earth itself had been poisoned. No one knew why, no one had answers, so we searched for devils. The next day, a Dominican priest arrived at the plaza, robes flapping like storm sails, sweat gleaming on his brow. He was a thin man with a sharp tongue, Spanish by way of some mountain monastery, and his voice carried like thunder. He seemed to appear out of nowhere, as if summoned by the very despair that thickened the air, and we turned to him, desperate, like drowning men clutching for a line. He mounted the steps of the chapel and raised his hands high. "Open your eyes, children of God," he shouted. "You drink from the well and your brothers die. Your sons burn from the inside, and you say it is the will of heaven?" Kindling suspicion, he looked out over us, a prophet seeing sin in every face, and we trembled under the weight of his words. "You say it is fate that your children fall through your arms like sand? No," he bellowed. "It is not heaven that punishes you, but men who serve hell. Foreigners, filthy and clever, creep through our streets with white powders and serpent oils. They pour poison into our wells, poison into your food, poison into your lives." We stood there, stunned and breathless, but not unbelieving. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Dozens had gathered by then, not just in grief, but looking for a reason, for someone to blame. A city as full of suffering as ours can only remain quiet for so long. Now we had an answer, a place to lay our pain. Some people crossed themselves, others muttered slurs. The old woman who sold dry fish claimed she saw a foreigner pour something into a well. Another joined her, claiming the French doctor was doing something strange, giving people bizarre vials. The priest pointed north and said, "Look towards the Chinese quarter, to the French apothecaries, to the English merchants. They bring with them sickness wrapped in coin. They say they come in peace, but peace does not kill children." The word struck like flint on stone, and we flared with the heat of it. The anger that lay dormant in us now flared. It had festered into hopelessness, into agony, until now. Now it had no choice but to erupt. He took a ladle from the chapel steps and flung its contents into the street. This was drawn from the well of Saint Eustachio. 4 people died after drinking from it. And where did we see a Frenchman standing last week? Next to the very same well. Gasps, cries, heads turning, doubt dissolving like sugar, leaving only fury behind. The priest leaned forward, lowering his voice now, almost gentle. "If they are not punished, then more of you will die. More mothers will fall. More unborn children will bleed into the dust. They must be punished, or their evil will consume you." He paused, letting us absorb the doom he promised. It was as if the entire plaza of San Lorenzo had gone still, breathless, waiting for the spark that would make us explode. And with that, he stepped down and walked into the shadows of the archway, his robes dragging behind him like a trail of smoke. We watched him go, his words echoing in our ears, still feeling the heat from the flame he'd lit inside us. It was worse than the sickness. It was poison. The easy allure of righteous blame. An old man picked up the ladle and looked at it with terror in his eyes. I heard him moan, "We're all cursed." And I felt the swell of anger turning to panic. Like a thick fog, it seemed to spread out in all directions, tightening its hold on us all. I couldn't watch any longer. Rosa pulled at my arm, her face panicked. But I was not on fire like the others. I followed the priest down into the shadows, needing to know, needing to understand. How could he be so certain? I reached the chapel steps and found him there in the dark, a lantern casting his thin face in flickering light. "Do you know it's them?" I asked, my voice small against the madness outside. "Or do you guess and call it truth?" He looked at me like a man looking through stone. "It's the same," he said. "Now leave me." Then Rosa was pulling me again, and we ran through the alleys where people swarmed like hornets, the rage stoked by the priest's words. In the distance, a crash. A stall turned over, voices raised in anger. We ducked under clotheslines and around corners, the night alive with fury. By the time we reached home, Mang was at the door, searching the street with strained eyes. He ushered us inside and barred the gate. "That priest," he said, his mouth set in a hard line. "He speaks what they want to hear." We lay awake, listening to the noise outside, straining to hear the first signs of trouble. There were shouts, curses, the rumors spreading like wildfires from mouth to mouth. By morning, the whole city was buzzing. Everyone had a story. Everyone had seen something. My neighbor Elias swore he spotted a Chinese trader squatting beside the aqueduct with a flask. The weaver's apprentice said he found strange white powder scattered by the well near his school. A Spanish soldier was overheard saying that the dogs are barking and it's best to let them hunt. Even my stoic, rational father-in-law grew restless. "There's too much death," he said, "and always near where the foreigners walk." His friend Raoul, a carpenter with crooked fingers and a loud voice, asked, "If it's sickness, why aren't they dying like us? It should kill them too, right?" I wanted to believe there was a reason, that all of this, the pain, the loss, Lucia's death, that it all meant something. The mind grasps at patterns when the world breaks apart, and the priest had given us one, a poison, a foreign one. And suddenly, I saw it everywhere. A Chinese man laughing outside the bakery, a French herbalist handing out bottles to the sick, an Englishman shaking hands with the alcalde, his gloves spotless white. They didn't cry at our funerals. They didn't burn incense for the dead. They didn't seem to grieve. That was the worst of it. Rosa tried to reason with me, saying that sickness doesn't have a face, that we don't know that they did this. But I was already gone. Each whisper I heard became a thread in a web of certainty. Each glance, each gloved hand, each foreign smile, it all wove together into a story my grief was desperate to believe in. I tried to resist. I tried to listen to Rosa, who begged me not to let sorrow blind me. She would say that Lucia loved peace, that she wouldn't want me to hate. But how could I not? The pain was too loud, my heart too hollow, and the voice of vengeance far too convincing. The next day, the Spanish guards didn't stop the mobs from forming. In fact, they seemed to watch with quiet approval. "Let them take justice," one muttered as I passed. "Let the dogs bite the hand that feeds them poison." I had sharpened the blade my father had given me years ago. I also cleaned the pistol that had hung above our door for years, untouched. I wrapped it in cloth and hid it beneath my coat. I wasn't the only one. The afternoon it happened, the air was thick with smoke. A shop had burned near the Chinese quarter. A white man was found dead in the canal, face down, throat cut. Others were missing. The mob moved through the streets like fire, burning, screaming, breaking. I walked with them, though I barely heard the cries. I was inside my own storm. I turned into a quiet street, trying to get away, trying to make sense of all the chaos. And then I saw him, a foreigner, alone, tall, thin, healthy, standing beneath the old archway near the cobbler's house. My heart was beating so hard I thought it would split my chest. I stepped closer. The pistol felt strange in my hand, heavy and foreign, like it belonged to someone else. I raised it. In my mind, I saw Lucia, her smile, the way she used to tilt her head when she laughed. But then I saw her lips cracked from thirst, her eyes wide with fear. He did this, I told myself. He brought the poison. He killed her. But another voice, softer, hidden deep inside, asked, "Do you know that? Do you truly know that?" The man turned around. We locked eyes. My hand shook. My finger hovered on the trigger. And the world held its breath, waiting to see if I would become the thing that I feared most. At first, Paul Gautron, a Frenchman who had arrived to Manila only a month prior, mistook the shouts outside his window for festival music. Perhaps a wedding procession or one of the impromptu parades the city sometimes held near the waterfront. This was Manila after all, where noise was the pulse of life, pounding endlessly. Vendors haggling, bells clanging, roosters crowing at odd hours. From his quarters above a candle shop in Binondo, The sounds that rose from the street below were chaotic but familiar. There was always people around, always movement. The city was alive with itself. The clatter of carts, the frantic barking of dogs. Arguments bursting like firecrackers then dissolving into the dense evening air. But as he stepped into the narrow balcony and the sound sharpened, he felt a small prickle of unease down the back of his neck. The crowd outside wasn't singing. Tonight, something threaded through it all that unsettled him. A thread of urgency that pulled everything else along with it. A rhythm. Not music, this was different. A chant, a roar. They were howling. This was not the cacophony of daily life, but a brewing storm. He leaned forward, sweat forming at his temples despite the hour. Manila was hot in October, stifling and rank, but something in the air that night went beyond humidity. It was charged, electric, ominous, like the moment before lightning, before the tempest breaks overhead. The stench struck him, smoke, charred wood, rotting flesh in the heat. Then, he saw the flicker of torchlight down the street and people running, not from something, but towards it. Something was wrong. A man ran by, shirt torn, hands smeared with blood. Behind him, two others dragged a Chinese shopkeeper out of his tea store by the hair, shouting accusations in Tagalog, too fast for Paul to catch. He didn't need translation. Their meaning was in the rage on their faces. Paul had heard the rumors for days. Nonsense, he thought at first. Whispers that the cholera sweeping the city wasn't natural. That foreigners were the culprits. Poisoners. Witches. He'd even heard that the Frenchmen, like himself, carried disease in their boots and brought it from ship to shore like a plague in a bottle. But he hadn't thought the people would believe it. That they would blame them. Take it out on them. Not until now. The rumors that moved through the streets were now being enforced by an angry mob, and Paul wasn't sure he could outrun either. He dressed hastily, hands shaking. He buckled his belt over a sweat-damped shirt. Twice he nearly dropped his coat. He pulled on his boots, buckling them all the way, pragmatic thoughts flashing through his mind. How fast could he run in them? Where could he go? When he went downstairs, he found the matron of the house, Clara, barricading the front door with a trunk.
They're saying you French, put something in the wells. They're burning shops, killing. You need to go.
I've done nothing wrong,
Paul protested.
That doesn't matter anymore.
A crash from outside cut the conversation short. Clara shoved a pistol into his hand.
Don't fire unless you must. They'll burn the whole house if they hear a gun.
Clara.
I saw a boy dragged from a rickshaw just now. The priest spoke yesterday. He said foreigners poisoned the wells. Now they believe it. All of it.
Paul's stomach turned. He had heard the stories. He laughed at them over wine just 2 days before with an English merchant and a Spanish clerk. Now they burned his ears. Paul moved fast, out the back way, past the latrine and out into a narrow alley. It was like he had entered another world. He passed a wall streaked with soot, where someone had scrawled in charcoal, "Clean the blood with blood." The words struck him as deeply as anything else he had seen. He tried to force them from his mind, to keep moving, but everywhere he turned he saw signs of the hatred too raw to ignore. The city was alive, too alive. Flickering shadows danced across cracked stone walls. Doors slammed shut at the sound of feet. A pack of dogs howled in unison somewhere upriver. Shops looted, doors broken from their hinges. He passed a Spanish guard standing idle, smoking. The man didn't flinch, didn't even raise a hand in protest as two locals smashed the windows of a Chinese store nearby. Across the square, a British apothecary lay motionless, face down in a pile of broken glass. Paul took a sharp breath, unsure if the man was dead or only stunned, and stepped over a boot. Just a boot, nothing inside it. He ducked into a carriage shed. He crouched low. His breath shook. He tried to control it, to quiet it, to silence everything around him. He had done nothing wrong. Why, then, did this feel like the end of all things? Not the fear of death exactly, but the way death had become normal, expected. The way a wrong glance, a wrong step, a hushed word from the right lips could bring it down upon you like the sky itself. This was a city of ghosts before the bodies left it. This was more than panic. It was fire feeding on fear, and someone had lit the blaze so that it would burn them all. He was ready to run again, to leave the shelter of the shed and make another desperate push through the city, when footsteps rang out. Clear, hard, too real. He pulled back, flattening himself against the wall. A group of men passed by, their faces dark, their mouths set like blades, their voices a chant that slashed the night, clean the blood with blood. They turned the corner. He waited. He listened. The pistol felt cold now, foreign in his hand. He slipped it under his belt and made his move. He moved swiftly, staying out of sight as best he could. The cobbler's house was his first goal. He knew the man well and might be able to find refuge there. If he could make it that far, he might stand a chance. He might even leave this terrible night behind. His heart beat with everything but hope as he sprinted down the alley. He tried not to see. Not the men throwing a body into a canal. Not the old woman with a cleaver, raising it and dropping it, raising it and dropping it. He tried not to hear the screams swallowed by the night. He got to the archway near the cobbler's place, but he spotted several men there, outside it. He had to change his plans. Maybe head for the docks. And then, just as Paul turned around towards the eastern canal, he saw him. A young man, barefoot, dirt-smudged, hair hanging wild across his face. He stood in the center of the alleyway, holding a pistol. Paul froze. Recognition flickered like a dying candle. Tasio. He had worked for Paul, helping unload his cargo. His hands had been quick, his laugh wholesome. A quiet, bright boy. Now he looked like something else. His shirt hung open, damp with sweat, his lips dry and cracked. His face was a ghost pale in the moonlight. But his eyes were filled with something sharp and hollow.
"Don't move,"
Tasio said. Paul raised his hands slowly.
Tasio, what are you doing?
"You poisoned her.
Tasio hissed.
You killed Lucia. You and the others. You think we don't see you in the shadows? Whispering with your doctors? Pouring powders into the wells? You walk clean while we bury our families."
Paul swallowed. The boy's hand shook, but his finger was already on the trigger.
I did not hurt her.
Paul said, voice calm, slow.
She got sick, like many. I've seen this before. It's not poison. It's in the water, yes. But it isn't something we gave. It's cholera, a disease. We're trying to fight it.
"You lie!"
Tasio shouted.
"That's not what the priest said. This thing is unnatural. He knows better."
He took a step forward. Paul held his ground.
There's grief in you,
Paul said.
I see it. But this won't give her back. This won't make sense of anything. Look at me, Tasio. I'm not your enemy. You know me.
For a moment, the world held still. Just the two of them. One man, too old to be a threat. One, too young to understand the weight of what his hands held. Then Tasio lowered the pistol. Not by much, but just enough. His lips trembled.
"I should kill you,"
he said softly.
But you haven't.
Tasio looked down at the gun like he didn't know how it had gotten there, then turned around, slowly, and vanished down the alley, lost in the chaos beyond. Paul didn't breathe again until the echo of his footsteps had gone. The city was unraveling, frenzied, senseless, insatiable. The river was closed now, and the stench rose from it in deathly waves. On his way, Paul saw a French trader, barely in his 20s, with his throat slit. Left there lying in the gutter. He passed a young Spanish mestiza woman, wailing beside the body of her husband, his face smashed beyond recognition. The people wanted revenge. They wanted blood. It didn't matter whose. Paul desperately tried to warn others, doctors, merchants, clerics. He discovered a few huddled together inside the seminary near the heart of the city, paralyzed by fear, their foreign traits marking them as targets in this turmoil. The Jesuit brothers offered them sanctuary, but even the thick stone walls of the seminary seemed fragile against the rising chaos outside. Thus, Paul took on the role of a guide. He moved like a shadow through the labyrinthine streets of Manila, leading a small group of terrified men, British, Chinese, French, through the city's darkened alleys, overgrown gardens, and the dimly lit basements of churches. Twice, they narrowly escaped capture. The first close call was near the bridge, where a mob had gruesomely hanged a Dutch sailor, leaving him to sway eerily from a lantern hook, casting a haunting silhouette against the night sky. The second encounter was with a group of teenagers who hurled rocks at them. A clay bottle whizzed past Paul, grazing him with a sharp sting. Yet Paul pressed on, impervious to pain. His focus was singular, his resolve unyielding. When the group of teenagers drew dangerously close, he brandished his gun, its metallic glint sending them scattering into the shadows. Fortunately, his act of defiance did not incite them to go seek the mob to retaliate. In the narrow hours before dawn, they were just a couple of streets from the port. There, he found a British pharmacist apprentice, barely older than a boy. He lay bleeding, his hands outstretched, begging someone to help. A group of people passed by and did nothing. Paul dragged him into a doorway and pressed a fabric to his wounds, whispering,
"Stay alive, just a bit longer."
But the boy never answered. They finally made it to the dock, where the masts of the ships loomed in the moonlight like darkened forests. They reached an old boatman who hesitated to let them aboard. Paul brandished his gun once again, the threat convincing enough. They piled into the rowboat, 5 men sinking it low, where it wobbled just above the churning bay. The boatman took the oars and pulled them slowly through the water, the city shrinking behind them. There, in the distance, Manila seemed to breathe with embers. It was a beast, a monster, a great ravenous creature that wanted not only to kill, but to consume. Paul looked back one last time, scars already forming in his memory. The boatman ferried them to a French ship, whose captain Paul knew. There was a commotion on deck. A dozen others leaned against the rails, half dead with exhaustion. When the rowboat reached the ladder, Paul and his group climbed aboard. The dock was behind them. So was the city. They had found safety. By dawn, the streets went quiet, but the smoke clung to the rooftops like fog. That morning, the Spanish authorities posted guards at key intersections. A belated gesture. The damage was done. The following week, the Governor General issued statements calling for calm. The church claimed the priest had spoken beyond his authority. He was quietly reassigned. There was no investigation. No one was charged. Neither the people who killed based on lies that they needed to believe, because grief without blame was unbearable, nor the passive Spanish authorities who profited from, if not encouraged, the massacre. No one knows for sure how many people were killed, but by some accounts, more than 130 people lost their lives during the massacre, most of whom were Chinese, French, or English. There are several written accounts of the massacre, but what they did not manage to fully express was the misery of the streets, the despair of the city and the grief of its inhabitants. No one can ever fully describe that crack in the fabric of humanity where fear gave way to loathing. Thank you for walking with us through the smoke and sorrow of 1820 Manila, a city consumed by fear and forever marked by the blood of the innocent. Stories like this remind us how quickly reason can collapse under the weight of grief and suspicion. If this episode stirred something in you, consider subscribing and/or leaving a review. It will help me bring more forgotten stories to life. Until next time, for another episode of Lore and Crime.